So today I'm chatting to Avni, and Avni is an osteopath, a doula, and a zero balancer. And she resonates with a type 4 on the Enneagram. So welcome, Avni. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a long while. We've been trying to set this up. So here we go. I wonder if we can start with you just giving a little bit of an introduction to who you are, specifically around a type 4 and how you resonate with the type 4. What about the type 4 do you relate to?
I relate to the aspect of the type 4 being sensitive and reserved and quite in touch with how I feel. And the type of person that looks for meaning, like that's very much me, that whenever I go through something or something happens in life or I read a book, I'm looking for the sense of meaning. So I like to live life at a certain, I guess, beyond the superficial, beyond the kind of what I consider meaningless. And I was just looking back on it before the call today, and like there's a lot about finding beauty, and I think that's something I do when I'm working with people or even in my home, like there's a kind of sense of an aesthetic or a feeling of just how it feels when you walk into the space. And I hadn't even ever attached the word beauty to it, but I really resonate with that now I'm reading about it. And the sense of being an individualist, like I'm often someone, I don't really like being in groups, and I often have that like, oh, but this is how I think, or this is how I trust things in life, or the Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFJ or P, I'm never sure of the two at the end, and that's quite a small minority of people that fit into that category. So I always think that, well, I'm just not, I'm not the kind of the mass of people, so therefore I have certain different rules for how I live.
And that's so typical for type 4, isn't it, to want to feel a little bit different, a little bit unique. So when you first came across, say, Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, how did you feel at the concept of even being a type?
It's both. I like a certain amount of structure and order, but then I also like the creativity and freedom. So on the one hand, having like a category just feels quite tidy, and then on the other hand, it's like, but I'm bigger than that, broader than that. I don't just feel it fit into a neat little box. So it's a bit of both.
Okay. And you mentioned when you were talking about beauty that you can walk into a room and you get a feeling for it. Can you speak to that a little bit more? What's happening for you then?
I mean, I listen to my intuition a lot in the nature of my work, but also just how I live and how I make decisions. So when I walk into a space, or if I'm connecting with somebody, that sense of how do I feel in this space is really relevant. A lot of my work is working with newborn babies, and I can see how much they really sense what's going on around them. So there is a certain seeing beyond what you can actually see, I think, that gives information. Yeah, and I'm really affected by space. So I've worked in, sorry to interrupt, but like in clinics where they were noisy or bad lighting, or just the energy just didn't feel right. And so like the feeling of the kind of harmonious space is quite important, which is not easy in a busy city to find spaces to work that are calm and quiet.
I'm sure. So in those kind of environments where it didn't feel good for you, how did you manage that? What did you do?
For one of them, if I'm really honest, I didn't manage it well, and I only worked there twice a week, but till quite late into the evening, and I got quite sick afterwards with thyroid issues and things like that. So I think my body just doesn't do well in those kind of environments. So I've made a lot of specific changes to make sure that doesn't happen again.
So some of the things that you've spoken about, I can understand how it would be hugely beneficial in working with your patients. Do you call them patients or clients?
I say clients, yeah.
Clients, okay. Yeah. So working with your clients to be able to go to that deeper level and constantly looking beneath the surface and intuiting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? So what aspects of the 4 do you feel you bring to your work that really, really support you and assist you? What are the strengths?
The strength of creativity. So sometimes when people come and see an osteopath, they're assuming that it's about bad backs and about pain. But I map a lot of the physical body with the emotions, or with the kind of energy systems of the body. And I think I do that in quite a creative way. So, for example, somebody might be carrying tension around the kind of right side of their upper back area. And if it has a certain feel, it can often relate more to anger or frustration and the liver energy. And that might not be what people are expecting. You know, they might be thinking, oh, the mouse is on the wrong position for them, or the screen is too low on their computer. So I think I'm quite creative on how I look at how someone lives their life or how their body works. And even the kind of exercises I might give, like, they're not very prescriptive. It's trying to tune into who that person is, what their lifestyle's like, what are they going to be motivated by. So, you know, I might have certain things that I tend to recommend a lot to people, but I do try to tailor quite a lot as well.
Okay.
So yeah, the creativity.
Yes. Okay. So I can hear the benefit for your clients, for sure. They're getting a much richer experience than they might have anticipated, and probably learning so much from you. What is the benefit for you personally in that creativity or fullness?
For me, I think the benefit is it never gets boring, because I am the kind of person that likes the shiny new thing. And if you're just working with people and working with bodies, and you know, there's certain generic things that everyone's suffering with stress, or everyone's tired and everyone's working too much, it would be really easy just to be bored, really, and just be like, oh, that's another person who has some physical symptoms that they need to get better. Like, I don't think I'd last very long in my work. So I've really thought about, in the long term, how is it best going to suit me, and thinking that my work is a kind of expression of myself. So then I need to really tailor it and tweak it so it suits me, because I just don't think, like, I was with the Enneagram, there's a whole thing I was reading about the sorry, just looking on my notes, but the kind of sense of individuality and that kind of sense of importance, that if it didn't feel like that, you know, if I was just putting on my job hat, it wouldn't be me.
Okay. So that your clients are getting the benefit from that individualized attention and that going beneath the surface, and then that intuiting, and yet it's giving you the same benefit because it's helping you live that sense of uniqueness, creativity, I suppose authenticity.
Yeah, variety. That's the word. I couldn't drag that word back, but authentic. Yeah, living an authentic life. I'm not someone, you know, when I first qualified, I used to wear a white coat because that's what the other osteopaths in my practice did. And over time I was like, this isn't me, and I can still be professional without having to do all of that. So, you know, I know it in my bones when I'm kind of on track with who I am. And at times I haven't been. So, yeah.
So when you say you feel it in your bones, what do you feel like when you're out of alignment, or when you're not feeling like you're being authentic?
I think there's a kind of resistance internally that just doesn't feel comfortable. And I mean, I was reading with the Enneagram that one of the challenges was like discipline, and don't just relate to your feelings, but you have to have some sense of discipline. But I do think I can be good at just still showing up on, you know, I'll still show up at work, present and caring, and, you know, but there's more of an ease when I feel like I'm purposeful. So so it's subtle, but there's a sense of ease or flow or softness that just suits me much more.
Is it something that's easy for you to recognize? Because you mentioned that, you know, the example of wearing the white coat didn't feel right for you. Or is that something that, you know, is that an example of something that's easy for you to recognize that this is feeling off? Or is it more a process of uncovering that you went through a journey of having to establish, well, who is the real Avni and what is it that she wants?
I think there have been examples of seeing what doesn't work, either what doesn't work for me, or seeing in the people around me that, working for someone who's really successful but has no time to himself, that doesn't appeal. That's not how I want to kind of live my life. So I think it's something over time. And as I'm getting older, I've got much more, I don't know, like I just do it my way and just be really, I've been kind of saying to clients clearly, I used to work in the evenings. I'm not the best practitioner when I do that. I'm better off taking better care of myself. And I'm really kind of quite blunt with it in a way, to be honest. And I think it's partly for my own professional boundaries, and partly it's a lesson for people, because if you're taking care of yourself, you're showing up much better as a version of yourself. So people often end up being a bit resentful if they're doing something that doesn't suit them. So I don't want to live like that.
Very true. And I suppose when you assert those kind of boundaries, you also modeling appropriately for your clients as well.
Yeah.
And helping them see what it's like to take better care of themselves too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so things like now I've decided that 4 or 5 hours of clinic is plenty for me. I feel like I've done a decent day's work, but then I've also got energy to cook dinner or to go and exercise or to read, or the things that make me feel alive. Whereas previously, it's not the easiest transition, but I would have felt like I was being a bit lazy, or I'm not working as much as other colleagues. But I feel like I'm far more on track with myself and what the long-term version of my life looks like as well, rather than just burning out. Especially in people professions and caring professions, I think those boundaries are just, they're not easy, but they're really, really important.
Hugely important. We often only realize their importance once we've crossed them and suffered the consequences. So you mentioned spending more time doing the things that make you feel alive. What are the types of things as a type 4 that make you feel alive? So you said reading or walking.
Yeah, so the very kind of introspective things like reading or kind of personal time to walk or to cook, or because I'm treating with people and hands-on and listening, I like a lot of my own space the rest of the time. And I also like things to do with creativity. So I'm not an artist, or I'm not someone who's talented, I don't think, in those kind of things. But I like anything to do with expression. So like on Saturday, I went to a Destiny's Child dance workshop, and I had never done something like that before, but it was really good fun. And, not having to be taken too seriously, or just doing something different, like that's fun for me.
I like the way you differentiate between creativity in a traditional sense and creative expression, because I think there's often a stereotype around type 4s that they're all artists, or they all work in these very, very creative fields, and that's not always the case. And creativity doesn't necessarily have to be in the usual ways. We can express it in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I'm much more about living a creative life, and I think of creativity as someone's life force in there. So to me, it reflects on health as well. It's kind of how much juice is there to see life with fresh eyes and things. So even though I don't think of myself as an artist, I very much live a creative life.
So I think that's one of the stereotypes I see about type 4s. That's, they're all artists, or tormented artists when they're operating in an unhealthy space. What are some of the other stereotypes that you hear about type 4s that maybe annoy you a bit because they don't feel true?
The bit about, I just have to say, when you were saying about tormented artists, I was reading a list of type 4s that are famous, and it was people like Billie Holiday and Judy Garland, and people who've done great bodies of work and really made history, but then they've been tormented as well. So yeah, that definitely doesn't feel like I resonate with that. But the bit about people kind of almost like feelings are everything, almost like there's no kind of sense of intellect or rationale. Like, I really don't relate to that. Like, I trust my intuition a lot. It gives me information that I don't think I could just think, in the work that I do. especially working with women through pregnancy and with treating babies, like sometimes I just pick up on stuff, but I'm not unboundaried by it. So I find it almost like it's making feelings into being like kind of how women would be treated, of like the sense of hysteria because they're feeling something, or something juvenile. And I'll always back things up with research and information, and I'm very practical and grounded. So I don't think that bit comes across in from what I've read about the Enneagram of 4. But yeah, it's almost like with feelings that there's a slight suggestion that it's a negative thing rather than a strength.
And yet with some of the other types, the guidance is to be able to access the feelings a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean, because I suppose that's the danger with people misusing the Enneagram, is attaching certain descriptions to each type, and then that becoming the perfect description of who that type is. And from what I've seen, yes, there can be examples of type 4s that are over-identified with the emotion, and that they can get sucked into the stories that they keep telling themselves. So they struggle to pull themselves out and move on or make a decision or let go. But oftentimes that's just a type 4 that's operating in an unhealthy space. And I think it's so helpful for people to see what a balanced version of a type 4 is, so that they don't, say there's a type 4 that's watching this, that they don't feel that they're stuck in their 4-ness and they're just an emotional person and will always be an overly emotional person and will never be able to operate in a more balanced way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because as you were saying that, I was thinking, I'm someone, I don't hold on to, like, I like decluttering my home regularly. I don't hold on to, I'm sentimental, but I don't have to just keep everything as it is. So I can respect what's been and also innovate as well. So I think if it's just to do with identifying with the self, it's hard to progress in life.
Absolutely. It's funny with the stereotyping topic that it can often mean that people then don't believe that you are a certain type because you're not presenting in the stereotypical ways. So people will say, Avni, you can't possibly be a type 4 because you're far too rational. And that's just another example of how we make sweeping assumptions about people as opposed to seeing them in their entirety. And remembering that Enneagram is actually about the motivation, not really the behavior, because behavior we can change. We have to. I often, it doesn't come up a lot in what I've read about Enneagram 4, but like, yes, I've got a very reserved and shy aspect to myself, but internally I'm not like that. That's definitely how I present to the world, but that's not, inside there's a lot going on, and that doesn't always kind of come through. And, there's much more lightness, even though I'm looking for meaning. So sometimes true. I think generalizations can be dangerous, restrictive. And as you're kind of saying, the way we present ourselves to the world versus what's going on internally, that's probably the difference, because we can all behave in a similar way, but it's not necessarily a reflection of what's going on internally at all. And an identification with meaning and depth and beauty and creativity doesn't have to be in a dark way. It doesn't have to be in a morbid, that tormented artist way. It's possible to work through it in a way that brings joy and lightness, for sure.
Totally. Like I was reading about how Enneagram 4s like to kind of make meaning from suffering, and I definitely relate to that. Like, I've created a workshop about grief and loss recently, but it's with a simplicity and a lightness. So I think that's where the creativity comes through. I think it's the thing of suffering has to have a point for me, rather than it just being, I don't know, just something really harsh to experience in life. But like, I kind of see it as something to evolve from.
And yet I think it's interesting that as a type 4, you're comfortable hosting a workshop around grief. So that's interesting to me.
Okay.
Because it's a big topic. So what you're going to be facing during those workshops and holding space for during those workshops is sacred. It's important. It has huge consequence in how you're handling it. And a lot of people of some of the other types wouldn't necessarily feel as comfortable being able to do that.
Oh, that's interesting. But does it make, because this is a workshop where people are kind of really in their own process, in their own body. So does that make a difference in space holding in that kind of way? It's not like a talking kind of workshop.
Yeah, I suppose I'm wondering if that fourness that is so comfortable with the emotion that could arise, your own emotion, the emotion that may arise during the processing that people are going through at an individual level, it's because you're comfortable with it, you're able to then hold the space for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So another type, for instance, would never hold a workshop on that topic because there would be fear about what might be uncovered, what kind of responses might emerge. And that to me speaks a lot to that for tenderness, that for ability to be with the emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So we've talked a lot about the positive side of the four and what you like about the four, which is great because so many times we start with the aspects of ourselves that we don't necessarily like too much. Can you share perhaps a little bit around what you perceive as the challenges of living life through a four lens? Where does it trip you up?
I think a certain amount of sensitivity can make it quite hard to exist in the world, especially if people are quite numb around me or kind of want to live more superficially. So, you know, especially just the modern world is so much faster, so there's not always space to integrate things. So I think the sensitivity definitely makes life challenging at times. Things like, say, I don't know, when things have been going on politically, I've almost kind of future tracked, well, if things are like this now, this is how it's going to be in the future. And people around me have been like, what are you even talking about? But it's like I can just see what the consequences of life going a certain way have been. And like, I don't know, seeing it with certain clarity.
And what goes on for you in your body physically when you're exposed to that kind of, or whether it's political foresight or the busyness of modern life and the lack of ability to be able to go deep and spend time and integrate, as you said? What happens for you when you're in that space where that isn't possible?
When I don't have the time to integrate, I think I can numb out quite a lot or get quite overwhelmed in my system from feeling other people's emotions. So, like, say, a few years ago when I used to commute on the Underground, I'd just pick up on people's stuff all the time and found it quite hard to separate. So, you know, I'm lucky that I could make decisions to not have to commute anymore. So that's made things a lot better. But yeah, either numbing out, and then it means that I'm reaching for sugar or eating too much, or kind of behaviors that are just, I think, my body just trying to ground itself, or just getting quite overwhelmed, really. Okay,
and the tools for dealing with that. So avoiding having to commute is the obvious one.
Yeah, I mean, I love being in a yoga class, or I love being at a rugby match or things like that, that there's a sense of kind of unity within a group of people. But there's something so disordered of being on a tube at rush hour. So when I don't have to do that, that's much better. Being much more active. So I have a few days a week now where I can walk to the clinic that I work at, and that's made a huge difference because it just feels like my body can kind of be prepared by the time I get there, and then I'm walking off my day. So that's really helped. One of my kind of pieces of homework I often give people is to just lie down on the floor and use that for physical grounding and let the nervous system just drain. And I do that a lot. So I can even do that in the clinic sometimes, or if I've been teaching, or, you know, things like, say, teaching a big group, that always drains my energy. And it's still a bit of a test for me to be able to do that. So I'll always have those practices. And I'm training in an approach called non-linear movement. And it works on trauma and the nervous system and things like that. And it's a really, really simple movement practice. But 5 minutes of that, which is just eyes closed, on hands and knees, and just moving whatever I'm feeling in my body. That's a really good way of letting go.
Sounds like a lot of body work, a lot of somatic practices.
Yeah. A lot of somatic stuff. I do meditate sometimes, but I'm not as disciplined now that I'm doing the non-linear movement. And then just little things like the senses really matter to me. So having essential oils and diffuser, or eucalyptus oil in the shower and things like that. So yeah, on a sensory level. And just with my nutrition, like I can tend to go more towards the kind of sugar and stuff. So just trying to be more, more nourishing to my body.
Okay. And that example you gave of, for instance, feeling the changes within a political climate and then your mind going into the future about the possible consequences. How do you manage that kind of headspace, that kind of thinking, so that that doesn't overwhelm you?
I mean, it could be quite a kind of catastrophic way of thinking and quite hard to live in the world. And so for self-preservation, like, I don't tend to watch the news. I do read the papers, but from time to time, rather than it being like a daily thing. And I'm quite considered of when I'm getting that type of information. I try not to spend too much time on the type of social media that can be quite negative. And yeah, I mean, there's also a part of me that feels, with what's going on politically, of like it's an opportunity to just show up more. So, you know, lately I've been much more, even though I'm such a person who likes my own space and everything, like, how can I be in community? Because I think that's one of the major ways to make change, or to have more of a contribution and things. So like on Saturday night, I was volunteering at a shelter that works with homeless people in the winter. And it was a really lovely environment and very, very human connection in a level of depth that I don't think happens every day, especially on a Saturday evening. So in a way, I'm kind of using things like that as ways to kind of tune out of things that I don't find so helpful, and then actually choosing where I'm putting my energy. Because I don't want to have that type of attitude of, oh, the world is in a terrible place right now and everything is so shocking. Because I do think, yes, there's certain aspects that things are really challenging, but then there are people in the world doing good work. There are people that are grateful. There are people that are respectful. So put my energy there. You know?
And that sounds like an example of a possible forward tendency that there's awareness of and being handled in an appropriate way. So if as a 4 it was in an unhealthy way, you might get caught up in all that drama of the world, and kind of opt out or get caught in the angst of it. But what you're describing is such a healthy way of looking at it, because yes, you're choosing to not expose yourself to things that are, you know, that have the possibility of taking you to that space, but then you're also recognizing where you can show up in a supportive way and where you can look for the lightness and gratitude and joy. And
trying to watch my own thinking. Like, say with Brexit, there was this kind of narrative that, oh, it's all older people who've managed to buy their houses and didn't have to pay for education, and now they're making it terrible for younger people. And I've tried to just actually have conversations with people, not make assumptions that they have a certain political style for a certain reason. And I think that's been quite helpful of kind of opening my heart rather than feeling kind of closed off to different people because they might have different beliefs.
So going back to your practice, when you were talking about the level of depth and the personalized approach that you take, the 4 very clearly would bring a gift into that space. I can feel that for sure. What might be difficult for a 4? So what challenges might come up for you in your work?
I mean, on a practical level, because I like looking at that level of depth and meaning, it can just mean, well, then you're either going to get really exhausted because it's not easy to operate in that space, or earning less money because you're seeing fewer clients. So I think, there is a certain cost with like having boundaries about it. So even though I tend to think of, like even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, but it suits me much better and I can see myself working like this at 70 years old. There is a certain cost, that's definitely for true. And to some extent, I'm not helping as many people as I could be, because when I'm doing one-to-one work, there's definitely a limit of what feels okay, And then having said that, that's where my creativity comes in, because I'm doing other work that hopefully will reach more people and in different ways. So, doing workshops and things like that. So I see it as opportunity, but there's definitely costs of like wanting to be at that level of depth, or because I'm so tuned into people's feelings. Like say just before Christmas, I had some clients that had some really, really heavy situations going on in their personal lives. And just in the run up to, the Christmas break and it being the winter, I just felt myself starting to go under, because, even just if someone texts me to tell me something that's happened, that's some tragic news, I'm feeling it, like the reverberations of it in my body. So there's definitely a cost that comes with that sensitivity.
How do you deal with that? So if you feeling every interaction to that degree, how do you keep going?
The phone has been a tough one. So I've had that a few times where clients have just told me something quite horrific that's happened to them, but in a text form. So it's like, you don't really have a warning for that. It's not like I'm choosing to come to my computer in work mode. I've got kind of do not disturbs on my phone, so it switches off at kind of 9 o'clock, and I think those boundaries, trying not to respond like on a weekend and stuff, just so that I'm almost like energetically having kind of firm places. And then things like the body practice to actually move what goes on for me. So like if a client has had a really traumatic birth and they have to tell the story so that I can kind of understand with my hands, and I'm also then feeling things with my hands, I'll do movement stuff just to move it through. And I often think of, say, midwives or doctors who are seeing, some good situations, but some really difficult situations every day. It just must build and build and build in their bodies. And, so that always just makes me think that's not, you're kind of in a traumatized state trying to help someone to be calm and in their body. That's not an ideal situation. And that's why some of my work is going into directions to help people actually clear what's building up. So it's not just me being the practitioner, but actually showing tools that people can use in their life.
So it sounds like your awareness of how you tend to respond to things has helped you in a couple of ways. So it's helped you assert your boundaries where necessary, but it's also helped you create relevant material because you have a sense of what people need. But also that you've been quite intentional about how you're doing this. So you're aware that there's a cost, but you have chosen depth and meaning over less depth and you know that what the consequences of that are, but you've chosen it anyway because it's important enough to you.
Yeah, when I first qualified, friends we'd always say, how many clients did you have this week? How many clients did you have this week? Oh, I had 50, I had 60, I had this. And in the early days, I think those numbers were really important to build up experience quickly. And then it was just like, you know, I'd paid off my student debt and I had some clarity of, okay, now I can actually work in a way I choose to. And I made massive changes. So when that started to happen, I'd work a half day in clinic and then do something like a painting class, or I went through a year where I was trying lots of different things, learning French and, you know, things, and to have more of a kind of cohesive thing between what's work and what's my life. But yeah, it has been intentional, but looking at people just almost like being like machines. So yes, it's a hands-on job, but it's a numbers game of, you know, getting someone on and off the table as quickly as possible. Like, that's just not the life for me, you know.
So knowing what you know about yourself as a 4, if you were speaking to a type 4 who's just starting their own business, what would you suggest to them? What would you say are important things to watch out for or take care of?
I'd say to know themselves, to know their own rhythm. Like, do they prefer to work a long day, a few days a week, and have longer time off at the weekend, like a longer weekend? Or do they prefer to do a little bit each day? Or do they want to have the kind of responsibility of a team of people? So they're going to kind of work towards having premises and having staff? Or do they want to work in a simpler way? So looking inward to find the model for them rather than seeing what other people are doing and trying to replicate it.
Because that's a potentially big one for 4s, isn't it? That comparison with other people and kind of trying to, I suppose, self-assess based on what's going on with people around.
Yeah, it's taken me time to really figure that out, but there's so many people just operating on what society says we have to do or what's convention. So it's like, if you're using someone else as a model of where to be in life, they might not have been that intentional about it themselves. So, you know, does that make sense? Whereas if you're looking, that's where I think the intuition and the feeling state is important, because for me, that's verification that I'm on track. So I'd much rather listen to that.
Yeah. And do you believe that's a learned skill? Do you believe everybody can develop that ability?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think in most kind of modern education, there's such a focus on things like data and research and, you know, blah, 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 on the kind of quantitative stuff. But I think there's a place, I think it's much more cohesive when people can have both. So, you know, even though I tune into my feelings a lot, I really think that I've got kind of, you know, when I'm on track, I've got clarity of mind as well. So it's not one without the other. And that kind of stereotype of like the artists and the creatives on the one side and then the bankers on the other, like life isn't like that. We all have elements of everything. So, you know, nourishing that more.
And isn't that the ideal, to be able to balance our head and our heart and our gut brain, to use them all as sources of information?
Absolutely. I mean, the teacher that I'm training with at the moment in the non-linear movement, she's a counsellor and holds a yoga lineage. She holds the space in a group, but she writes books and she has many doctorates. Like, to me, that's how I want to show up in the world as a woman, of, you know, to have a brain that works, but have a deeply refined sensitivity that is useful. And, you know, and I'm nowadays, I'm really looking for examples of that. As those are the kind of people I want to learn from.
Absolutely. We need those role models more than ever now.
Yeah.
Okay, last topic I want to look at is how you as a 4 manage relationships. So what's important to you in relationships? It doesn't necessarily have to be with a significant other, but friendships, work colleagues, that type of thing. What do you look for?
like in my marriage or my kind of personal relationship, the space to be who I am and to still learn and grow. So I think of a relationship as something that's solid and committed, but then there's a lot of room for growth amongst that. So that's definitely not the kind of role models that I grew up with, where people would just be together for years and spend all their time together and constantly be together and do everything together. So the kind of wiggle room, I guess, is important to me, but still within a really solid commitment. But that's the kind of non-negotiable for me. It's not just a kind of free for all. And in my friendships, nowadays are so different from the people, say, I went to school with and that I was good friends with at that time. I think it's a reflection of who I am now as a person. But if I think, like, say, some of my friends are quite similar minded to me, some of them are not, but we have certain ways that we connect or certain things that we do together. So there's a kind of combination of the safety of knowing how you spend time with each other or how you kind of get on, and then also just a certain space and freedom as well.
Okay. So you mentioned the space and freedom, but you also mentioned the connection with people of different types. What do you look for in order to have a real connection with people?
Depth of kind of conversation and a certain way of seeing the world, like just beyond the everyday. I'm always interested in just what makes people really tick. So not if it's someone who's just doing things for someone else's benefit or for, I don't know, like I don't have a lot of friends where they're particularly materialistic, or, you know, I have lots of friends that are ambitious, but it's more for themselves rather than so that I can have 2 houses and, you know, 6 holiday homes and all of that. So I guess that sense of kind of more meaning.
Okay. And if you had to give advice to somebody who was in relationship with the 4 or had a friend who was working with the 4, what would you suggest to them about how to interact, communicate, engage with a type 4?
I would say give them a lot of space in their life or in their head to just kind of make their own choices and sometimes like know the difference of just being present and trying to kind of interact and trying to do something, or like the kind of ease of just being with somebody and you don't have to even say anything, but there's just a feeling of connection. Like I think sometimes that can be, sometimes people can be kind of fixers and doers and not be able to just be in that state. And not, I mean, you know, hard to think of it in a 4 sense rather than just myself, but like space doesn't mean aloofness. It's that space of just forming themselves. So if they have that space, they're forming who they are, and then they can be much more present. But without that, you know, something's not working.
So that space is allowing them to be themselves, but also from what you're saying, it sounds like the processing or being with whatever's going on. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Avni.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. That was great.